Well, welcome and thanks to all of you for.
And
for
my
coming.
family.
This is your family.
My husband and my 2 children.
You brought the whole household.
We are.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. We have to have you take the oath again. And,
Okay.
I hope you don't.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sue. Could you raise the Bible in your right hand and read the oath for us, please?
The evidence that I shall give before the committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So help me God.
Thank you. You may sit.
Thank you very much. We're going to begin with a couple of questions from Minister Husbands.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good afternoon to you, Ms. Sue.
Good
and
afternoon, ma'am.
Your legal representative. Couldn't remember the name. Thank you for returning. There were a couple of things that I had wanted to clarify now that I have a better understanding of more of what would have transpired. Of particular concern would be your management meetings. We were discussing the issue of the transmissions, and I believe we were told that y'all had management meetings at which the various departments would report. I wanted to ask if you can recall at any of the management meetings if there were discussions about the transmissions, the constant breakdowns, etc. Was there any discussion on that?
Yeah. Yes, ma'am, yes. Yes, I can. There would have been discussions.
And this was when Ms. Ford was manager and present?
Yes, please.
What was the gist of the discussion on the transmissions?
The quality assurance manager would be in a better position to say, but I
don't need the
Yeah,
I don't
but-
need the
right.
fine
But generally,
detail.
you know, it would be reported what the main issues that you were having in your department. So an indication would be given that, you know, why were we having so much repairs, why so much expenses, and it would be said, you know, because of transmissions.
Mhm. Okay. I believe you would have had, the Transport Board would have hired a consultant, a fleet consultant, who came with the express view of addressing some of the issues that the Transport Board was having with keeping the fleet on the road.
Yes.
My understanding was that he had mentioned about transmissions and had made a suggestion before he was actually on board. During the time that he was the consultant helping you all to work through the problems and trying to keep the fleet, did you all receive reports from him on the issue of the transmissions? Did he come and do verbal or written reports pertaining to that area of maintenance and transmissions?
Yes, because he was present at some management meetings.
So he did address what was transpiring in terms of everything, including transmissions?
Yes.
Okay. Did, having drawn that to the attention of the group, were any determinations made about how you would deal with the transmissions?
I don't recall.
Okay. All right.
Because since that, as you know, was a technical area.
Yes.
But I don't recall.
Did you at any time draw to the attention of the management team and the general manager, from the accounting point of view, the impact the issue of maintenance and equipment was having on the viability of the transport board? Did you raise those in reports, meetings, verbal, oral.
Just, yes, ma'am, I would have sent emails. I have an email where I would have asked certain questions on the update and the situation with transmissions, yes.
You have copies of those?
Yes, I do.
Okay,
No.
okay. And those emails were addressed to,
Okay, several persons, so I wrote to the gentleman from ATS Transmission. His name was Shane Stud. I have an email to him
mhm,
asking about the orders. I also sent an email to Mr. Clarence Challoner asking for kindly update the storage records to reflect the receipt and dissemination of transmissions. And yes, I would have sent, as I said, Sheen Stud. I copied these. When I sent the email, they were copied to the relevant persons, the store supervisor, the general manager, Mr. Codrin, the quality assurance manager, and the QA manager,
okay. So store supervisor, general manager,
quality assurance manager,
quality assurance manager.
and quality insurance advisor.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
And I also sent email to Mr. Codrington, copied general manager, quality assurance manager, accountant, and the IT manager, asking again, requisition was created. I have several concerns which I shall outline below, and I sent that in an email to Mr. Codrington with a list of 6 concerns. So it's here.
Did any of that correspondence raise the issue of purchase of transmissions from overseas versus buying them locally?
Could be implied, could be implied, because one of the questions I asked, why wasn't a requisition created for these transmissions before they were ordered and received? So who authorized the purchase initially? So it could be implied.
In terms of who made the decisions on where to purchase transmissions, based on the discussions at the management meeting, what was your understanding of who ordered, approved the purchase of those transmissions and from where?
My understanding would be the store's supervisor in conjunction with the same consultant who generally did and they would have consulted, I believe, the quality assurance management. That was my understanding.
Okay, so it was among those 3 persons that the decision would be taken as to where the transmissions would be taken from, whether
Yes.
overseas or local.
That was the quality assurance realm, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Minister Husbands. Ms. Ford, a few questions, perhaps a little bit more than a few.
Not Ms. Ford.
Sorry, Ms. Sue. Ms. Sue. I got Ms. Ford in mind because my first question has to do with Ms. Ford and yourself. The General Manager, Ms. Ford, did not encourage me at all by what she said here last meeting, that you often wrote to her or copied her in on your concerns relative to the operations at the board vis-a-vis breaches of protocols, procedures, etc. But you said that both you and the general manager would often discuss the policies and procedures of the board. Her testimony was that her evidence was that you did not write her in on many of these matters as you had formally suggested. That you did not copy her in or write to her on many of the matters.
Mr. Chairman, every time I wrote a memo or an email, I have evidence and
All
some
right,
of which I
so
would
you will
have
make
shared.
sure that we have a copy of every memo.
All right, some of
Please.
which you would have copied already, but
Please,
yes.
we want all of them,
Okay.
if you don't mind. The Auditor General raised this question, and I'm not too sure I was happy with the response. It's in the report, and I think he raised it last time. The process of renegotiation on the part of the board that saved the board about $1 million in fleet-related insurance. I think he wanted to know, both in the report and by oral questions last time, what would have made for such a drastic or vast difference in terms of the insurance premiums you were able to pay. You were paying $1 million less than previous arrangements. Were the previous payments inflated for some particular reason? And which would have been the company involved in that insurance contract?
I indicated, Chair, that the number of buses was the main reason for the reduction.
Reduction in the number of buses?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the company,
It was the same company.
and
who
that company was?
CGI Insurance.
And who led the renegotiation of the contract? You did, or?
It would have been the board, they would have submitted the relevant documentation for what they're quoting for, so it would have been the board.
So the board. Okay, you said there were checks issued for supplies not related to the board's operations in the first instance when you spoke to us. In the latter instance, or the second instance when you spoke to us, you said not so. So in reply to the question, were there, to your knowledge, checks issued by the board for supplies not related to the operations of the board? In the first instance, your reply was yes, and at a subsequent session, you said no. Could you clarify for us, please?
Yes, I can. Your question, Mr. Chair, as I understood it, you asked, this is the one, any knowledge of any checks for payments of supplies other than what related to the board? And my answer was that I made reference to a situation where the chairman of the board would have submitted a request for payment of invoices. And it was that to which I referred, which I subsequently told you, it was that. He submitted the documentation and we said not related, it was for board, transport board matters, but it was the procedure with which I was relating to and how I understood the question.
So the answer is definitively no. You have no knowledge of any checks issued for purchase of supplies that were not related to the board's operations.
That is correct.
Okay. My recollection when we spoke of it, firstly though, it had nothing to do with the chairman's demand for reimbursement on any check that he had, on any payment that he had made. They're two different things. But I just want to hear from you today. You have no knowledge of any checks issued for payment on services not related to the board's operation.
That is correct, no knowledge.
All right, we also asked you if you were instructed, as far as you can recall, instructed to do anything which would have been contrary to the board's policies, protocols, regulations. And in the first instance, you said yes, and the second instance, you said no.
Again, Chair, I was referring, that situation remains the same.
The chairman,
I referred to the invoice and the documentation, the lack of documentation that was not submitted but was subsequently submitted.
okay. Now, you refer to the fact that you documented your concerns to management because you considered that the failure to follow procedures allowed for indiscretions. That was the word that you used Minister Jordan used some rather more acceptable euphemisms, less acceptable terms, I should say. You use the euphemism indiscretion. He said something else. He said that you wanted to cover yourself. Are you aware of it? Can you point to any of these indiscretions? You wrote of your concerns many times to management because you were concerned of possible indiscretions. You wanted to cover yourself. Are you aware, and can you point to any of these indiscretions?
Excuse me. Right. No, yes. No, sir, I don't have any evidence of any indiscretions.
You just feared that it could happen, so you covered yourself.
And in keeping with, as I said in my documentation, with good accounting practices.
All right. Couple of questions on double invoicing. You said you knew of 4 specific instances related to 4 different buses over which there was double invoicing. That's correct?
That information was drawn to my attention by the Auditor General.
To the value of $257,000, $128,000 approximately overpayment to a particular company. And it's related to 4 buses, 4 instances, 4 different buses. Did the board ever recover any of that money?
As soon as it was drawn to my attention, Mr. Chairman, I contacted the manager of the company, Transtech, in the presence of the internal auditor, and he said he was willing to repay the funds once the evidence was proven.
And he was presented subsequently with the evidence?
I went on vacation immediately after that, so I am not.
When you
aware.
came back from vacation, were you able to ascertain whether or not the repayment was
No,
made?
no.
You didn't check it out?
No, sir.
So you don't know if that money was repaid?
No, I don't know.
Now, these invoices would have been signed off on by whom?
Excuse me?
In the normal course of things, these invoices,
By the quality assurance manager
Mr.
or the
Codrington?
officer, yeah,
At the time?
or his deputy.
Now, you were questioned as to how this could happen, that you had these instances of double invoicing. You said that the system being used at the time should have thrown up a red flag.
No, I said the system at the time, Magneto, where there was no written manuals, so persons.
Was this a Magneto system in use at the time or the other system?
I think the Magneto system, because the Magneto system was introduced in 2011. I think that was introduced from what I can recall.
And it should have thrown up a red flag?
I cannot speak to that, Mr. Chair, because I was not trained in Magneto formally.
But you were in charge of the accounts department?
Yes, and as I said in my last evidence, that I repeatedly asked for manuals and documentation to be provided, and it was only done when I acted as general manager.
Was there anybody using the system or managing the operation of the system at the time who should have spotted a red flag on these matters if a red flag were thrown up?
I would not be able to say.
So this matter of the over invoicing was not taken up at the management meetings?
No, it was not brought to our attention.
It was not?
No, as I said, it was brought to my attention through the report when the Auditor General
But
did it.
subsequent to the Auditor General's office reporting on it, the management didn't look at it?
Like I said, I went on vacation immediately after that, so the minutes should reflect if they did. I'm not sure.
We can't find the minutes.
I wasn't there, sir, so the minutes should reflect such.
So, do you hold an opinion as to why double invoicing would have taken place?
No, sir, I don't have an opinion.
You have no opinion as to why that should have happened?
No, because as I said, the system, I'm not sure of the operation of the Magneto system because there were no manuals. So therefore, I'm unable to give an opinion.
You documented to management your concern relative to authorization of payments?
The-
Is that one of the things you
This
documented
is
to
the next
management?
Authorization of payments, you're asking?
Procedures relative to authorization of payment, did you document your concern relative to that?
And as far as I wanted to have the support and documentation for all payments to be made, that was documented, yes.
All right, I want to ask you a couple of things about BM 506. Now, we learned that BM 506 allegedly was sold in 2018, a receipt issued for the sale. A request for transfer on ownership was received by the board and came to your attention in 2019, a year and some months later. You said you found it strange that the bus shell was bought in early 2018, receipt issued, and yet a request for the transfer came only in April of 2019, a year and some months later. You hold to that position.
That's when I was acting GM.
But that's a strange happening, strange occurrence.
When you say strange, I'm just saying the period that had elapsed, it came to me when I was acting. It should have been dealt with previously.
You didn't find it strange the request was only being made a year and some months later?
Yeah, I don't have any opinion, sir.
You don't?
No.
But why is that? Eh?
I can't give an opinion as to why it would have come a year later. It came when I was acting, and I sent to have the matter rectified.
Okay. You know, of course, you did tell us you found it strange last time you spoke with her. I would too, were I in your position. So you did not know, for the record, that BM 506 was sold. Hear me carefully. You did not know that BM 506, the bus, not the shell, the bus was sold.
I did not know, and I recalled I would have said I did not know. I told you that.
All right. You also did not know that there were 7 other buses reported missing by Mr. Bartholomew, consultant on fleet management.
That was not brought to my attention. I don't recall.
The staff of the Auditor General did not bring this to your attention?
I don't recall. If it was in the report, they might have, but at this point in time, I don't recall if they did.
Now, in your previous testimony, you said you insisted that the procedures for disposal of buses was not followed by the Quality Assurance Department. That's still your position? Procedures for disposal of buses was not followed by the Quality Assurance Department.
The Quality Assurance Department knew what the procedures were, and it was of being their responsibility to follow the procedures.
But you gave the opinion that they did not follow the procedures. The documented record of your evidence. Procedures should have been followed. The standard procedures for the disposal of buses, those procedures were not followed. They were not followed from the Quality Assurance Department, who would have sent the documentation to the Finance Department, where we wrote to have the buses boarded first, etc. So there's a procedure which, according to you, was not followed by Mr. Codrington's department.
If the bus, the BM 506, yes, was sold without that procedure being followed, it was not followed.
So you were not privy to any procedure being followed in relation to bus BM 506. You were not aware of any procedure being followed in relation to the boarding and sale of bus BM 506.
No,
So as far as you're concerned, financial controller, this bus has not been sold.
that is correct.
Uh,
I was not aware that the bus had been sold. Let
I
me
got
just
you.
make that clear.
Dr. Brown, anything? Dr. Brown, anything? Ms. Trotman, anything?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just a few areas that I probably need a little clarity on. The first had to do with the insurance. I'm not too sure what was the basis for,
We're not hearing you.
you're not hearing? Can you hear me now?
No, we can hear you.
Yeah, right. This is in connection with the insurance. I'm still not clear exactly because the response we would have gotten from the Transport Board that there was a renegotiation of the rate. So I was kind of curious as to what was the basis for the rate in the first place. Is it a general fleet coverage? Is it per bus? Is it, how was the rate determined basically?
The rate would have been for a fleet of buses, so it would be any number of, say, 250 buses. That figure comes to mind.
Right.
So the renegotiations then, rather than 250 buses, the renegotiations would be for, was for example, 100 buses.
All right. Okay. So tell me something, because obviously the amount of buses would have declined over time. So you're just wondering, it was, so you moved from 250 to 100, or was it a series of negotiations? Every time the numbers drop, then the rate will be adjusted?
It depended on the bus availability, and the bus availability had dropped significantly at that time.
Right, the bus availability had dropped, but it didn't drop one time, that's what I meant. So what happens, like let's say it dropped, because the rate would have been determined for 3 or 4 years, so I'm saying that the bus numbers would have been declining per year. So is at the end of the contract period, the 3-year period, then that the rate will be adjusted?
That is
As
correct.
opposed to during the period, even if the buses were declining during that period?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Trotman. Mr. Senator Drake.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Ms. Sue. I recently joined the committee, so I was not aware of, or I'm not as up to date with the testimonies that would have happened prior to me joining the committee before. So if I do repeat some of the questions that were asked before, I apologize, but this is in the sake of clarity, and some of the questions I have follow on from the chairman's questions. Last week when we spoke to the former general manager, and I made a note here, and she said, and it struck me when she said it, she said the financial control at the time, yourself, did not add any value in financial decisions as it relates to the persistent maintenance and repair costs. Would you refute that statement?
Yes, I do.
If you're saying you refute the statement, can you then point to any specific action outside of the emails that you just mentioned, raising concerns about the purchases, that would validate that you're saying that you would have added some type of value to the decisions around the financing and the increasing costs as it relates to maintenance and repairs? Were there any reports or specific memos that you would have written to the general manager or the board to have an assessment then of those costs?
Not that I can recall, but my actions would have, why it would have been done would have been at management meetings where all the managers were there and we discussed that. Additionally, the income and expenditure statement was for each month would have been given to the general manager each month, and that would have been an area which stood out other than wages and salaries. So it was at that point, again, I would have highlighted to her that this is a significant area where much of the expenditure would be centered.
Thank you. At any point, did yourself, the former general manager, and the quality assurance manager have a specific meeting relating to the persistent maintenance costs and repairs?
I don't recall if we would have. I know I would have spoken to the quality assurance manager on a one-to-one on several occasions, but I don't recall if we would have, if they would have included the general manager other than at management meetings.
Okay. The other question that I have is regarding the double invoicing. I know usually when, and forgive my ignorance as I said, I know usually when you are running an accounts department, there's some type of reconciliation that happens at the end of the day, the end of the week, the end of the month. Based on the information provided in the Auditor General's report, wouldn't it be fair to say that someone in your department would have had the responsibility for flagging these double invoices?
There would have been the person who entered the information in the system who should have been aware, is my opinion.
Could you tell me the number of persons that are in the accounting department at the time?
The entire accounting department, because if we talk about payables, because at one point it was over 100 in terms of the accounting department, but in terms of accounts payables, which was this section, there was just one person.
Okay. And was that person trained in Magneto? If you know the answer to that.
Because there were no manuals and persons would just come and speak, you know, they used to use the system, but to say that they were trained, I can't say.
So it would be fair then to say that things like double invoicing could have been a regular occurrence because of the lack of knowledge about the system?
It is possible.
Following on from the chair's questions regarding BM 506, you noted that the procedures based on the quality assurance section was not being followed. Walk me through then what is the normal procedure for the sale of a bus?
The quality assurance manager would indicate in writing that these buses are no longer viable, and the board and myself, or the GM, would write to the Ministry of Finance through our parent ministry requesting permission for the buses to be boarded or to be sold. So we awaited that permission, and so once we get that permission, then the bus will be disposed of by auction or otherwise.
If that is the case, then where would the responsibility lie for the procedure not being followed? In terms of the person who should flag that that has happened?
That question for me, again?
If the procedure is not being followed, and it has been highlighted that the procedure was not followed, who is then responsible for highlighting that the procedure was not done, the correct procedures were not done, once it's come to your attention? Okay, let me try to break it down even more then.
Yeah, because
If I am I am a car salesman, and I'm responsible for just the sale of the car, but I have a manager who's responsible for making sure that the paperwork is correct, the appropriate signatures on the sale, and that manager is responsible for not necessarily the sale of the car, but the administration of it. Once, let's say, the owner of the car dealership realizes a car has been sold without his knowledge, where does that responsibility lie in terms of who's the person that should have known that that procedure was not done or carried out?
I would answer that again by saying the procedure starts with the quality assurance manager, who indicates in writing that these buses or this particular bus need to be sold. So if the system was not followed, it would have to start with the person who would have originated or who should have sent the original documentation. Then it should have been followed through, probably by the general manager.
Thank you, Ms. Sue.
Thank you. Is there anything, Senator Nurse?
Yes, Chair, just two little follow-up questions, really. The first one relates to the general manager. Last week mentioned having to reassign some of the duties that were on your portfolio. You remember one specifically was something to do with stores. Recording, I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly what it was, but something to do with stores. My question really is, and because previously you had indicated that some of your duties had been taken away because you felt that you were asking too much questions and you were raising too much memos and so on various issues. Are you satisfied that the general manager said these duties were taken away because there was conflict with some other duties? Are you satisfied, or do you consider that to be a reasonable indication of why they were taken away?
I stand by my previous testimony, which would be reflected in the notes.
That is that you were asking too much questions?
There might have been, now there was a conflict of interest in some of the personnel in the department.
So you were concerned about this conflict of interest, and you expressed that concern or indicated that concern, and you think that that is why some of your responsibilities were shifted? That's the position you gave us last time?
That wasn't the position I
So
said.
that's
at
your
this time.
repeat. Yes, Senator
Okay.
Nurse.
Okay, the other question I had was, the chairman, in giving his evidence, he had raised the issue of some concerns he had with information which you had provided from time to time. In relation to some of figures, I believe it may have been in budgets or some projections that were done by you. And he was querying specifically, I remember one of the queries had to do with the high costs which you had included for, I believe it was transmissions in those budgets that you were preparing. Do you still stand by your numbers, and can you give us a little more detail as to how you arrived at your numbers preparing your budgets?
Yes, I stand by my numbers because my numbers included provisions for wages and salaries in the Quality Assurance Department. It included the various taxes and those were the two main costs which were not included in his figures. He just took the costs of the particular item and converted it. But in my costs, I made provision, as I said, for the work that had to be done to bring the particular item transmission into a state that it could go into the bus and be on the road, which included the overheads and the part paid by the Quality Assurance Department.
Okay, so you would have had quotations, or you would have gone out and got some information on these costs and so on that you would have included in your budget?
There were costs that were provided, so we knew what was the customs costs and the various
Provided by
taxes.
who? Provided by who?
The person who clears the items, you know, so they were being provided by the stockbroker. I can't remember is the person who clears the items. So those had to be in. So we had to pay taxes on certain things.
Okay.
Then I would have taken the wages and salaries from the Quality Assurance Department, particularly those persons that had to play a part, the Quality Assurance Manager, Quality Assurance Advisor, and I explained and took a portion of their salary and wages to add to the cost of the item.
Okay, so you're comfortable with your numbers?
Yes.
Okay. Were management accounts presented at the managers' meetings and at the board meetings?
Yes, management accounts were presented. For each month, each department, including finance, would give a summary of all the areas, revenue, expenditure, highlighted any subsidy and everything received, so that was given in a written report. The board under the Mr. Wiltshire and Ms. Ford, they said they did away with the written analysis, which I have a copy here of evidence of June 2015, and they would have been provided with the income and expenditure report each month, which was taken to as well as the payables. So the financial information, the income and expenditure, accounts payable, accounts receivable, would have been given to the general manager, and I believe she would have shared it with the board.
Okay, but did you attend board meetings also?
No, sir.
Okay, so
Yes,
you
ma'am.
don't know the level of discussion that would have taken place in terms of looking at the management accounts, in terms of questioning of the high level of maintenance costs and other issues which may have come out of those reports that were prepared for the management meetings?
No, I would not be aware, but I know at management meetings, they would have been highlighted And on occasions when we had to go to the ministry, parent ministry, or the Ministry of Finance, the level of expenditure would have been highlighted, as well as the small subsidy or the inadequate subsidy that was given to finance the board.
Okay. Right. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We have Senator Moore still with us?
That's it.
Not hearing her. Minister Jordan, did you have anything?
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of questions. A couple of them maybe particularly following on from the testimony last time from the former general manager. I think it would be fair, and following on from Senator Drake, who asked the more direct question. My question, given that so much of the Auditor General's report spoke to inefficiency from a cost perspective. So these expenditures, which would include things like double invoicing, even outside of double invoicing, the matter of the amount spent on maintenance for particular units or buses or whatever you call them. The question I had last time really related to systems at the level of management. I'd asked earlier when you gave testimony before about systems at the level of the accounting department, but at the level of management in terms of the management meeting. I got the distinct impression in the last sitting we had last week that there was not a focus from you as financial controller in those meetings in relation to costs. The impression that I got was that I think I used the word refrain, but that you focus on the fact that the board had no money, and you also focus on revenue, that maybe we should use these routes or stop going on these routes. And I also got the impression that there was a greater focus on costs coming from the quality assurance manager. And my question to you was, maybe in retrospect or having given some thought to it, did the finance department, did the financial controller, did the board pay enough attention in your mind to costs, the cost elements that made up the operation of the transport board?
The answer would be yes, because as I said, when the income and expenditure information was presented at management meeting, the two costs that stood out were personal emoluments and the maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
So that always was something that I spoke about. And at management meetings, which would have had both the quality assurance manager and the quality assurance advisor, even after that, I have evidence here where I wrote to the line breaks. I sent an email to quality assurance officer, copied the manager, accountant, and the GM. And I said the finance department has observed that the charges from Simpson Motors to realign brakes far exceed the charges from QCVM. Below are a few examples, and I list that here. Kindly investigate and advise of the reason for this disparity in the amount. So to answer your question, I drew it to management's attention, but more so and more often, I always spoke directly to the management of the quality assurance department.
Okay, and that email that you refer to, is that unique? Is that part of what you did on an ongoing basis?
Most definitely, sir.
What, which is most definitely the unique or ongoing?
Ongoing.
Mhm.
Ongoing.
So you have a number of those
But
memos
as much
that
as
you.
possible, I find, I mentioned in my last presentation here, I spoke to the tools for the special project. I have that. I also wrote about the levels of authorization. So I
Okay, so
So
what
it was
kind of?
ongoing.
Yeah, okay. I'm tying today to the question and the response I got last week from the former general manager. What kind of response did you get from both the quality assurance manager and the general manager in response to the queries? So you asked about breaks. One supplier is significantly higher than another one that could be used in your view. What kind of response did you get? Not necessarily specific response, but what was the tenor of the response? Concern for the costs, willingness to explore alternatives. What kind of response?
I would get an acknowledgement by the Quality Assurance Department, but I want to reiterate that we were all on the same level as managers who were responsible for each area, finance, the quality assurance. So the responsibility would have had to be the general manager who was the supervisor and responsible for the management of the entire board to follow up. But as I said, when I write these various things here, quality assurance procedures, quality assurance, all my examination information entering into Magneto, I have emails, I have them all here. As I said, it would have been copied to the general manager who should be the person to insist or ask the quality assurance manager to follow up, because the quality assurance manager and I, we are both on the same level.
Right. So you are not necessarily answering the question, but you're covering yourself. I can sense that. The question that I have is, well, let me break it into two questions. Beside acknowledgement, and I've learned in government that noted could mean about a dozen different things. So my question is, beside duly noted or noted, I've become very familiar with those terms, was there anything else in terms of response? I'm not asking if you were able to make the quality assurance manager respond to you, but I'm asking what kind of response did you get? Did you get a response first? And if you did get a response, what kind of response?
I note, sir, that you always say covering myself, but I don't know what you mean by that, because I do my part. I have a concern and I drew it to
Right.
not only quality
But the
assurance.
reason why I said that is because I asked you the tenor of the response, and most of your response to that question was to explain that you're at the same level as the quality assurance manager, and the insistence on a response should have come from the supervisor of you. I really wanted to find out, not necessarily that, I wanted to find out if you got a response, and did the response suggest to you that there was a concern about the costs and a willingness to address the costs?
No, oftentimes I got no written response.
Okay,
No.
okay. That is really what I wanted to find out. You also spoke to providing written analysis. Did I hear you to say that that was stopped? The written analysis you used to provide to the management meeting?
Yes.
I heard something that sounded like that, but I want to be sure.
Yes.
Any reason why that was stopped?
I can't say. I don't know.
Was it stopped by you?
No, sir.
Okay. And given what you said about the relationship between yourself and the quality assurance manager being on the same level, I'm assuming that the quality assurance manager did not stop it either.
No, this report, and I have evidence here, management report is what it states. Each
Right.
month, each department would have to provide a report of a summary of the
Mhm.
key issues in their respective department to the management meeting and subsequently to the board.
Right, so why did you stop
Not
presenting?
me, I didn't stop them. The board, the general manager said it was not needed, so we just gave the income and expenditure statement.
Okay, so you start providing written analysis based on a request, if you may call it that, from the general manager?
Yes.
Okay. Did that impact your ability to have the management team focus on the matters that relate to finance and accounting and that kind of thing?
Yes, it would. Because in these reports, I would have indicated and I give the analysis, the percentage increase of wages for the particular month, year over year, the variance and explanation of the various variances. I would talk about the cash flow and then the financial projections for the coming month.
Okay, so you're saying that when that was stopped, then the management group, management committee would not have had the benefit of that kind of written analysis that they could take away and
They
and
couldn't,
study?
it would have been done verbally.
It would have been done verbally?
Yes.
Okay. In your mind, and I'm asking a question based on your voice when you made this statement, do you think that impacted the level of oversight, the quality of oversight by the management team on the finances and the details that you would normally have presented?
You're asking if the fact that the written explanation for the variances
Mhm.
impacted,
Yeah, my question is, you're not given the written anymore, you're given an oral presentation.
yes.
Do you believe that the oral presentation was as effective in the system of management as the written one would have been? In other words, did it matter that the written analysis was stopped?
Yes, it would matter. I think the written one would have been more effective.
Okay, you figured the written one would be more impactful. Okay. There was, you spoke to the size, I think Senator Drake asked about the number of persons in accounting, in the accounting department. Did I hear 130 or was that?
Oh, at one point, when I first joined the board, because the accounting, the finance department consisted of revenue, fuel, stores, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, right.
Okay.
Yeah, and statistics. So in the account, so in revenue alone, which would have been counting the money, there might have been 50, maybe 40, 50 persons given the rota, and we
Mhm.
used to operate from, basically 24 hours.
Mhm.
So that in itself. So when I said in accounting now, the accounting department would have had, which was just, say, if you think accounts payable, one person, accounts receivable had two persons, payroll had, at one point, I think 4 to 5 persons.
Mhm.
So this is when, say, accounts department, then if you limit it to those areas, accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll,
Mhm.
you see, and accounting, as opposed to the other revenue, stores, statistics, and fuel, which then the total number would have been over 100.
Okay. One person in payables, what did that person do? Did that person, I know you had a magnitude system, we spoke of that when you gave evidence previously. What was the role of the accounts payable clerk officer?
They would receive invoices, enter the information into the system. They would pay prepare the checks. They were
Okay.
responsible for doing reconciliations, and this would have been supervised by the accountant.
Okay. Was one person doing that function? Do you think that was a sufficient number?
No, no, sir. And oftentimes, as I would have requested more persons in that, even more persons in accounts receivable, which needed more persons, we were, influenced by the fact that the budget could not allow for more persons to be hired. And even in having an additional accountant, I remember, but in that case, you had to go through the stakeholders like the unions and things like that. So, but the main restraint was the fact that we didn't have the finances.
Okay. The reason I asked, I know that it is normally felt that you should always have more people in receivables and payables because you want to collect. You know, there's not a focus on payment. But I'm asking the question given the double invoicing and the fact that the double invoicing doesn't seem to have been picked up until the Auditor General's team went into the organization. Along the way, given that you had seen certain deficiencies, do you think that the operation of the Transport Board was impacted, and I'm referring now to negative impact, based on staff allocations? Maybe not enough here, too many over here. Do you think that there was any impact?
There would have been a need for additional resources, but most definitely in accounts payable and receivables. Just as I said, there was one person in accounts payable, and that the workload was a lot.
Okay. I'm just trying to remember that I'm only asking questions because my response to that might be that with 100 people in the accounts department, I probably also would have said, no, you can't get any more, maybe you can reallocate existing
Right.
resources.
No, it would not have been that easy because, as I said, you had in revenue would have been specific to cashiers who would have been
Mhm.
receiving and
Understood.
counting money, and similarly statistics. So the persons in another section might not have necessarily had the resources to do that. I would say, though, that I would have tried on several occasions to even move some person from, I remember the fuel supervisor, who I thought had skills that could help, into the accounts department, say, to help. But that was met by resistance by the union because, you were heavily unionized. So we always had a situation where persons felt they were here longer, so therefore this person shouldn't come in, they should be the one, and they might not have necessarily have had the resources. So that was a constraint.
All right. My final question is probably the most dangerous one for me. You seem to be suggesting that, because this is the second time you mentioned the union, you sound as though you are suggesting that the operation of the board could have been of a better quality, more effective, let me put it that way, but there were restrictions because of the relationship with the union.
That's
Is-
not what I'm saying.
Okay,
No,
but let's
sir.
explain to me then what you are saying.
I'm saying because of the various stakeholders that we have, one of which was the union, we had to follow the various protocols and allocations for staff. So therefore, years of service, various things were taken into consideration when decisions were made. And because they were our joint partners, discussions had to be ensued with them.
All right. I probably have to be more careful than you, so I think you can feel free to answer completely. You say that the protocols had to be followed, and you speak to years of service, so tenure. What you said earlier about the person in fuel had to do with ability. And I got the impression that you were saying that it was not possible to have a person with the ability brought into the department because, and I'm going to use your term, stakeholders would not allow you to go in that direction. Is that what you said? Or something to that effect?
Yes, but the situation is such that you had to follow, certain guidelines, and certain questions would be asked. So we would have to enter discussions and things like that. So, as I said, there would have been general agreements, but there would have been resistance in some instances because, for example, I might felt that Ms. Husbands might do well, say, in payables. She is currently working in fuel. The general operation is, and the modus operandi of the board would be that, for example, now you were working within the account section longer than Ms. Husbands. So therefore, it should be she's the one who should have come in payables then, as opposed to the person from fuel. So I'm saying, even though it might be, there would have been discussions and certain challenges.
All right, so did you attempt to have that discussion?
Yes,
You attempted to have that discussion?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Jordan. Now, Ms. Sue, could you please ensure that we have all of these bits of correspondence to which you referred, that you would have directed either to Mr. Codrington or to the general manager?
Even the ones that I gave you already, sir?
Well, if you gave us some already, we have them, but the others that we don't
Sure.
already have. All
Okay.
right? Yes, Doc.
Good afternoon, Ms. Sue, Dr. Brown. Just staring the board back a little differently, I'm still trying to understand the role of the chairman with respect to the purchase of tools and equipment from abroad. I didn't see any invoices written by him, most of them, which would involve the stay overseas and rental car. He was sent away specifically to buy equipment for the board.
That would have been a board decision, ma'am.
Okay, and with respect to the invoices coming in, I see at one point there were, most of them, not the local ones. I am not seeing original invoices. Would the board have original invoices of the purchases that the chairman of the board has? I'm seeing his invoice, but not from the companies that he would have purchased equipment from.
Again, that was so, and this is why I explained, and I would have clarified, that when the invoices which you were saying came from him, I then wrote and asked for the original invoices to be provided, and they were subsequently provided.
Even the ones overseas,
Yes,
from overseas.
from what I recall.
Okay, so I would need to inquire if he was specifically sent away for that.
Well, that's the question. I don't think, well, certainly not to me. The answer to the first question wasn't clear. I think Dr. Brown was asking, was he specifically sent away for the purpose of acquiring these parts or equipment, or was it incidental to a trip he was making overseas?
I cannot say, Mr. Chairman,
All right,
because that was
okay.
a board decision.
All right.
The other thing, please forgive my ignorance, I was trying to remember the Auditor General's report, but reading it over today, I came upon something that speaks on the non-delivery of a special scenic tour bus. And a little over, well, $65,517.15 was paid to the supplier overseas. Whatever became of that? It ever
Not
arrived,
overseas.
or
No,
well,
that
wherever
was-
it came from?
Right, that was a bus that LNN was configuring, so that money was being paid, from what I recall, to LNN.
We got the bus.
Not, the quality assurance manager may be able, but I don't recall if we did.
You don't recall?
I don't remember
If
getting
a whole
it.
bus came.
No.
All
Okay.
right, just to interject, I get back to you. And remember, we took up that, and it was never clear, and I'm glad you raised it, Dr. Brown, as to what ever became, because $65,000 would have been paid, but the bus at that time was not received. You know, you spoke to
L&N.
L&M.
N.
L&N. Just for the record, could you tell us the company L&N? Any specifics about the company is L&N?
No, they would do special projects, something like this for the board. So this was intended to be a scenic bus which we could use in marketing. And marketing was an area where we could get more revenue than the 150, you know, for various tours and things like that.
And when you left, the bus hadn't come as yet. It was still outstanding. Delivery of the bus was still outstanding.
From what I can recall, yes, it was still outstanding.
All right. And that's the official name of the company, just L&N?
Yes, I can't remember the L and N. Yeah.
It's the same company that doing buses at Perry Gap. Is this the same company that doing buses or mechanical work at Perry Gap?
I don't think so. They were in over by Lester Vaughan at the time.
Or up in,
when they were doing
okay.
King Garden, yes.
Yes, no. All right, well, please make sure we have those bits of correspondence. Yeah, so I want to, now, we have Mr. Codrington still to come. We are up against a time schedule, unless it is absolutely critical. Minister Husbands, please, and succinctly.
Very, very short. Thank you, Chair. One question I had about a process you have in terms of preparing your budgets to send to your parent ministry. When you were dealing with maintenance and parts, did the quality assurance present you with how much they wanted to spend on the different elements?
That's correct.
So do you know what would have been budgeted in terms of transmissions, given that a local transmission was $22,000 and overseas transmission was about $6,000? What would have been put in the budget for transmissions? Was it for $6,000 transmissions or $22,000?
I don't recall, but I would recall that I would have discussions to trim the budget and to ask for the cost to be lowered given the subsidy that we would get, but I don't recall at the moment.
And to your knowledge, during the 3 years, you received a mix of overseas and local transmissions?
Yes.
Okay, last question. Just a query, something that you raised when you were responding to Senator Drake's about the issue of not following the protocol for the sale of a bus. My question was, I believe Mr. Catwell had, when he was applying to get the letter confirming that y'all had sold the bus to him, he had produced a receipt. My question would be that somewhere in your system, that receipt would have been there, and therefore it should have triggered that the process connected with boarding this particular vehicle should have popped up at that point. How can you account for why that receipt could have been issued without the resulting correspondence, verification, the process, and who would have written that receipt?
The cashier would have written the receipt, and the amount was immaterial because it was, I think, just $300.
Yes.
So that would not have been significant enough to trigger an investigation.
So it would not have said, if that he's paying for a bus, the receipt would have been issued for paying for a bus. But somehow, through your system, it would not have alerted that the other verifications were not in place for this bus to be sold. That would not have been triggered.
It was a bus body, and the receipt would have been written by the cashier, then would have gone on, you know, into the system from there, so it would not have been triggered, no.
So there was no one who verified this $300 for a bus body?
I don't, it would have been written by the cashier.
No, I'm good
Yes.
with that part. I'm good
Yes.
with that part. So I'm saying when that comes through the accounts, no one would pick up that here is a bus body that has been sold, but attached to it would not be the paperwork that said it was boarded such and such and such a time, put up for sale such and such a time, approved by such and such a person. It would not have been accompanied by any documentation at all.
It would should have been, when it come through the system, it would have gone to the accountant, and no, it would not picked up, it would appear.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. Ms. Sue, thank you, and thank you also to your council, accompanied you, both of them, and your family. Appreciate their being here, showing interest in these matters as well. Wish you well.
Thank you, sir.
Folks, we have to take a couple of minutes break to allow for cleaning before we have Mr. Codrington to come in.